Story 1. The locker that never stays shut. Midnight in a crowded hostel dorm. My locker kept unlocking itself, without breaking the padlock. It was close to midnight when I first noticed it. The hostel dorm was quiet, just the low hum of the air conditioner and the shuffle of someone turning in their bunk. My locker was 2 feet from my bed, padlock dangling the way I'd left it. Only the shank was snapped open. No scratches. No bend. Just hanging loose like someone had slipped the key in without waking me. I told myself I must have forgotten to click it shut. Jet lag. Tired brain. But the sight of my backpack half unzipped inside made my chest tighten. My stuff was still there, passport, wallet, camera, just slightly off like a hand had rifled through and then tried too hard to make it look untouched. I closed the bag, snapped the lock shut again and lay back down. My eyes didn't leave that locker. The room smelled faintly of detergent and damp socks. Everyone else was asleep, breathing slow, steady. I tried to match their rhythm, but every creak of the bunk frame above me snapped my nerves tighter. Then I heard it, metal against metal. A faint rattle. My locker shivered once like someone had nudged it with their foot. I sat up, heart in my throat, but the padlock was still shut. I crept over, bare feet sticking slightly to the cold tile floor. The padlock looked normal, closed, solid. I tugged on it. Firm. My reflection in the steel door looked pale in the faint light from the hallway. I pressed my ear against the locker. Nothing but silence and the faint throb of my own blood. Still, I felt stupidly certain someone had been inside. By the next morning, I convinced myself it was nerves. Long trip, too little sleep, cheap padlock. That's all. But when I unlatched the locker for breakfast, something felt wrong again. My clothes weren't folded the way I left them. A shirt I'd stuffed at the bottom was neatly folded on top. My backpack straps were twisted as if someone had lifted it out and set it back in a rush. I asked the guy in the bunk across from me if he'd heard anything last night. He rubbed his eyes, shook his head, mumbled something about earplugs. Everyone else looked half dead from jet lag. No one cared. So I laughed it off too, but my stomach didn't settle. When I locked the door again that night, I slid the key into the tiny pocket of my jeans, checked it twice and lay facing the locker. The dorm was darker that night, only the green glow of the exit sign breaking the black. I lay still, every muscle tight, pretending to sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again. A soft click, then the faint scrape of metal shifting. The locker door trembled against its hinges. I didn't move. My breaths came shallow, controlled, as I watched that narrow outline of steel quiver in the dark. The padlock didn't fall. It didn't clatter. But the door itself bulged outward as though pressure was pushing from the inside. My skin prickled, every hair standing upright. I wanted to reach for my phone, for a light, for anything, but I was pinned under the weight of dread. The thin door shivered twice, then stopped. Silence swallowed the room again. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. At some point, the bunks creaked as others shifted in their sleep, but no one woke. I kept my eyes locked on that rectangle of metal. Then, so soft it almost blended with the hum of the AC, came a sound from inside. A scrape. Like fingers dragging lightly across fabric. My throat tightened, but I didn't dare cough or swallow. And then it happened, the padlock clicked. Loud in the silence. Too clean, too deliberate. I saw the shank spring open, swinging slightly in the dark. The door eased forward an inch and something inside shifted, a weight sliding against steel. My heart slammed so hard I thought it would wake the room. My mind screamed, "Would you check your locker in the dark?" I couldn't move. My body locked itself down while the door remained ajar, breathing the dark back at me. I waited for a hand, a face, anything to emerge, but the room stayed still. After a few minutes, or an hour, I can't be sure, I forced myself to roll over, eyes squeezed shut. Sleep never came, only the rhythm of my own pulse hammering through the night. When morning light leaked through the blinds, I bolted upright. The locker stood closed. Padlocked tight as if nothing had happened. I pulled at my jeans pocket for the key. Empty. I tore through my bed, my bag, the sheets. Nothing. Whoever or whatever had opened it didn't just put everything back. They took the key. And now I can't stop wondering if it's still out there, waiting to use it again. Story 2. The reception bell at 3 a.m. They say every hostel has its stories. But what if the story isn't whispered by travelers? What if it's told by the building itself? At 3 a.m., one ring at a time. It was exactly 3 a.m. when the sound cut through the silence. A single ding. Sharp, metallic. I froze in my bunk, staring at the half-open door of the hostel dorm. The reception desk was just down the hall, visible if you leaned far enough. I did. The counter was empty. No staff. No guests. Just the bell sitting under a weak yellow lamp, still trembling as if something had touched it. At first, I told myself it could have been the draft. The entrance door didn't shut properly, and wind had pushed stranger things around. But when I padded barefoot across the cold tiles, every step echoing in the narrow corridor, I felt it wasn't the air. The bell had been pressed down. Deliberate. I swear I heard the soft creak of someone moving away down the stairwell, though I saw no one when I looked. The reception itself was nothing special. Scuffed counter, chipped key rack, a notebook-sized guest log with a cheap pen chained to it. I glanced at it, more out of habit than curiosity, and that's when I noticed something strange. A handful of names were crossed out, not with a single line but slashed over and over in thick red pen. Some pages even looked gouged, the paper nearly torn through. My stomach tightened. Why would a hostel cross out names like that? I backed away, telling myself it wasn't my business. But the sound followed me. Soft, measured steps on the stairwell, descending just as I turned back toward the dorm. They weren't hurried. They weren't careless. They were controlled, like someone wanted me to hear them but not see them. By the time I peered down the staircase, the concrete steps were empty, lit only by the buzzing fluorescent light. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I tried to sleep after that, pulling the blanket over my head, but every time I shut my eyes I pictured that bell. Its polished dome catching the light. The way it had trembled after ringing. Around 3:30 I heard it again. Just once. A single chime echoing down the hall. This time I didn't get up. I stayed frozen in bed, listening, my pulse hammering in my ears. The morning came dull and gray, with the usual shuffle of travelers checking out. I went back to the desk, pretending to ask about bus schedules, but my eyes went straight to the logbook. More names had been crossed out, always in the same angry red ink. The receptionist, an older man with tired eyes, didn't acknowledge it. He just slid the book toward me and tapped the page like it was nothing. I wanted to ask. I didn't. The second night, I stayed awake on purpose. No blanket over my head, no excuses. I sat by the dorm door with the light off, staring at the counter down the hall. The bell gleamed faintly under the yellow bulb, the only real color in the dark. For a long while nothing happened. Just the hum of electricity and the occasional cough from a sleeping guest. Then right on time, 3 a.m. sharp, the bell rang. I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding but legs moving anyway. The counter was empty again, but the air carried that faint static feeling like before a storm. As I got closer, I heard it, the retreating steps. Softer this time. Slow. Like someone wanted me to follow. I leaned over the desk. The guest log was open, the pen resting diagonally across the page. I swear the ink was still wet where another name had been slashed in red. I reached for the pen, half to prove it was just a trick. But before my hand touched it, the bell rang again. Louder this time, like it had been struck with force. I jerked back, eyes locked on the small dome of brass. It was moving, slowly pressing down, then lifting as though an unseen hand were testing it. My throat dried. My instinct screamed to run, but my feet wouldn't listen. Then the footsteps started again. Not fading away this time, coming closer. Crisp, deliberate steps crossing the tiles toward the desk. I spun around, expecting someone, anyone, but the hall was empty. My ears picked up the faintest sound of breathing just behind the counter, low and steady. I couldn't bring myself to look over. I just stood there, trapped between the bell that rang on its own and the presence I couldn't see. I finally backed away step by step, never taking my eyes off the desk. The bell stilled, but the pen rolled across the guest log as if nudged by invisible fingers. It drew a crooked red line through a name I didn't recognize. The air smelled faintly of iron, sharp and metallic, like blood on old coins. My knees felt weak. I wanted to shout, to wake the others, but no sound left my throat. The next morning, I begged to see the security footage. The receptionist sighed, almost like he'd expected me to ask. We watched together, grainy black and white, the empty counter glowing faintly under that single lamp. At 3 a.m., the bell depressed on its own. No hand. No figure. Nothing. The pen slid across the page as if pulled by a magnet. The receptionist didn't comment. He just turned off the monitor. His silence was worse than any explanation. Would you wait at that counter? Story 3. The window that wouldn't budge. 1:20 a.m., alone in a hostel basement, I learned a window can sound louder than any scream. It was 1:20 in the morning when I first heard it. The basement of the hostel was colder than the upstairs rooms, but it was the only bed left that night. Concrete walls, low ceiling, a single bulb overhead. I had almost convinced myself that the hum of the pipes would lull me to sleep when the window above the storage shelves rattled. Just once, sharp, metallic, like something testing it. At first I thought it was the wind. The basement window was small, square, set into the stone wall near the ceiling. I remember trying it earlier, painted edges, handle stiff, wouldn't budge no matter how I pushed. That memory gave me a strange comfort. Whatever brushed against it now, it couldn't get through. I told myself that as the sound came again, softer, like nails dragging across the glass. I lay still on the narrow mattress listening. The scratching was faint, irregular. Not an animal. Not branches. More like someone tracing circles with their fingertip. The thought unsettled me because that window wasn't even at ground level outside. Whoever touched it had to crouch down, lean close, almost press their face against the glass. I sat up, the springs of the bed groaning under my weight. My breath felt heavy in the stale basement air. A damp smell of detergent and mildew clung to the storage shelves. Above them, the glass fogged briefly as if someone exhaled right against it. The shape of the breath spread and vanished, but it was enough to send a shiver up my back. I grabbed my phone from the floor, thumb hovering over the flashlight icon, but I didn't turn it on. Some part of me thought the dark kept me safer, like light would confirm that someone, was really there. The glass trembled again. This time the handle twitched, a quick jerk downward. A sound followed, the dull scrape of metal under strain. My throat tightened. The hostel above was quiet, no footsteps, no doors. Just me in the basement, staring at a window that shouldn't move. I whispered to myself, "It's stuck. It's sealed." But the handle pulled again, harder. The frame shuddered in its setting, dust shaking loose from the painted edges. Whoever was outside wasn't testing anymore. They were trying to get in. I pressed my back against the opposite wall, phone clutched in my hand but still dark. The scratching turned into a steady push, like palms smearing against the glass. Then came the sound of breath again, harsher this time, leaving a cloudy oval that lingered longer. I could almost imagine the shape of a forehead leaning into the pane, stubborn and deliberate. The handle jerked so violently that the sound cracked through the silence. Metal strained, a sharp pop echoing across the basement. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. The lock inside the mechanism had snapped. Yet the window didn't swing open. It stayed shut, sealed tight by layers of paint and time. I wasn't sure whether to be grateful or horrified. I stood frozen, staring at the pane. Nothing moved now. No scratching. No breath. Just the faint reflection of my own wide eyes in the dirty glass. I waited for footsteps retreating, for any proof that whoever had been there was gone. But there was nothing. Only silence, heavy and pressing, as if the basement itself was holding its breath with me. Minutes bled into an hour. I stayed awake, sitting rigid on the bed, eyes locked on that stubborn square of glass. Every creak in the pipes, every distant car outside felt amplified. I wanted to go upstairs to wake someone, but I couldn't bring myself to move past that window. If it opened while my back was turned? I didn't want to imagine it. When dawn finally bled into the basement, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Light filtered through the glass, weak but steady, and I saw it clearly. The window was wide open. Not cracked. Not broken. Open. The shelves beneath were damp, a small puddle seeping across the floor. I hadn't slept, yet somehow I felt like I'd lost hours. Later, when I told the staff, they shook their heads. That window? It's been painted shut for years, one of them said, almost laughing. I didn't argue. I just nodded, keeping the truth to myself. But I keep replaying the sound of that handle snapping, the fog on the glass, the breath. Would you stay in that basement room? Story 4. The card that opened the wrong door. It's late at night in a foreign hostel. You trust the thin walls, the lock on your door, and a flimsy plastic keycard. But what happens when that key starts opening rooms you were never assigned to? It was 11 p.m. when I first noticed something was wrong. The hostel hallway was narrow, lined with identical metal doors, each one blinking a small green light when unlocked. I swiped my card against my own door. It opened with a click as expected. But when I absent-mindedly tried the door across the hall, the reader flashed green again. The knob turned freely in my hand. I froze, card still in my fingers. The room wasn't mine. My bunk was supposed to be 3 doors down. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just a glitch. But curiosity made me push the door open an inch. Inside, the lights were off and I caught the faint smell of damp clothes, maybe sweat. Someone shifted in a bed. I pulled the door shut quickly before whoever it was could notice me standing there. When I finally got into my actual room, I checked my bunk. My backpack was right where I'd left it. But the zipper was halfway open. Not how I'd left it. My skin prickled as I pulled it closer, checking inside. Everything looked there, but the way the flap hung open made me feel like someone had already been through it, careful but not careful enough. I told myself it could have been the cleaning staff, maybe a roommate I hadn't met yet. Still, I slid the pack under my bed and sat with my back against the wall, card in my palm. I stared at its plastic sheen under the dim bulb, wondering how it had opened 2 rooms. The hum of the hallway light bled through the door, steady, but I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I hadn't been the only one with access. Later that night, after brushing my teeth, I walked back down the hallway. For no reason at all, I swiped the card against another random door. The reader blinked green. My chest tightened. I didn't push this one open. Just hearing the lock disengage was enough. I backed away quickly, the thin carpet muffling my steps, heart drumming in my ears. Back in my bunk, I kept listening for sounds in the corridor. Footsteps. Doors opening. The faint shuffle of fabric. Every creak made me tense. When I finally drifted into a light sleep, I woke again to find my door not quite latched. It stood just a fraction open, enough that the slice of hallway light spilled across the floor. I slid out of bed, careful not to wake anyone else. My fingers brushed the edge of the door and pushed it shut until the latch clicked. The handle felt warm, as if someone had just been holding it from the other side. I stayed there, hand frozen on the knob, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the old ceiling fan above me. The next morning I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I hadn't closed the door properly. Maybe. But that night, when I came back from dinner, my backpack was out from under the bed, propped neatly against the wall. The zipper this time was fully closed, like whoever had been inside wanted me to think they were being respectful. That small courtesy was worse than theft. I stormed down to the reception desk, holding up the card like evidence. The clerk barely looked at me, just said the system was fine and no one else could be using my key. He even pulled up the log on his screen. My card. My door. Nothing else. His calm dismissal made my anger fade into something colder, because I knew what I'd seen. That night, nerves buzzing, I tested the card again. One door opened 2 steps down the hall. Another across from the stairwell. I shouldn't have tried, but I had to know. Finally, I pressed it against the very last door at the end of the corridor. Green light. A click. When I pushed it open, the hallway lights behind me flickered. Yet the room itself was nothing but darkness. A void swallowing sound. I didn't step inside. I couldn't. The air from the open doorway was colder than the hallway, still and heavy, like the room was waiting. I held my breath and pulled the door shut, the click of the lock echoing down the corridor. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the card. Would you test that card again? I left the hostel the next morning, checked into a cheap hotel across town. Before I left, I asked the staff again to check the system. They smiled, swore nothing was wrong, even showed me once more. Only my card, only my room. But sometimes late at night I picture that last door waiting in the dark. And I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I'd stepped through. Story 5. The camera that never blinked. They say cameras don't lie. But what if one never looked away, never blinked, and followed only you? Afternoon light spilled through the tall windows of the hostel's common kitchen. I was stirring instant noodles when I noticed the security camera above the doorway tilt, slow, deliberate, until the lens pointed straight at me. At first, I thought it was coincidence. A draft maybe. But when I carried my bowl to the long wooden table, the lens followed. Its movement was faint, like a twitch, but the circle of glass fixed on me as if waiting. I tried to laugh it off. Hostels were old, patched together with mismatched furniture and unreliable wiring. Cameras probably shifted on loose mounts all the time. Still, when another guest walked in and crossed the kitchen, the lens didn't move. It stayed locked on me. I tested it, sat at the far corner near the fridge, pretended to check my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the camera tilt again. Smooth. Unhurried. The glass I turned until it faced me, only me. That evening, I passed the reception desk where a small monitor showed the kitchen feed. At least it was supposed to. When I leaned closer, the screen went to static. White noise filled the tiny speaker until I stepped back. Then, as if nothing happened, the image cleared for a second, before flickering again. The receptionist didn't even glance up. I wanted to ask about it, but my throat dried. Instead, I went back to the kitchen. The camera's red light glowed steadily, a tiny dot in the dark. No matter where I sat, I could feel it resting on me. The next morning, I noticed something strange. During breakfast, a German backpacker tried plugging in his laptop beneath the camera. The outlet didn't work. I leaned closer and saw the cord trailing from the camera itself, cut clean, hanging loose. No power. Yet the red light still blinked. My stomach dropped. I pressed my palm against the unplugged cord, tracing the frayed end with my thumb. The plastic felt warm, like it had been carrying current. The lens above me gave the faintest click, as if it had just taken a picture. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I climbed onto a chair and covered the lens with a dish towel, pinning it in place with tape. For the first time since I'd arrived, the kitchen felt normal. Just a kitchen. I went to bed almost relieved. But when I woke, my phone buzzed with a new email. No subject line. Just a single attachment, a video file. My hands shook as I opened it. The footage was me, sleeping in my bunk, blanket pulled to my chin. At the bottom corner of the frame, the watermark read, Kitchen Cam 02. I stormed to the front desk, shoving my phone toward the manager. His face stayed calm, almost bored as I played the clip. He shook his head before it even finished. That camera? He said, glancing toward the kitchen doorway. It hasn't worked in years. I didn't argue. I just packed my bag and left the hostel before nightfall. But sometimes when I'm in a room alone, I catch the faint click of a shutter. And I can't help but wonder, would you sit under that camera?